Polls are closed. It is Democracy 2022, the midterm election. Results are already trickling in some cases more than trickling. So much is at stake in this election. So we're going to walk you through the next however long it takes. We're going to walk you through. I'm Evan Millward from WCPO9, UC Political Science, American Politics Professor David Niven joining me here to give some color commentary. If you are streaming us, wherever you are streaming us, we're going to show you things in real time here. So anytime someone has a concession speech or a victory speech, none of those have happened yet, though we have had some races called already. We want to show you those now. 3 races in our area have already been called. The first is Ohio governor, called within minutes of polls closing for incumbent Republican Mike DeWine. That happened truly minutes after polls closed in Ohio. The second is for U.S. Senator in Kentucky. This happened also within minutes of polls closing for Republican incumbent Rand Paul beating Charles Booker there. You see the results on your screen. Again, not even fully reported, but already projected as the winner. The third in our area, and it's so appropriate that it happened in the tri-state. So you got Ohio, Kentucky. This one's in Indiana. U.S. Senator from Indiana, incumbent Republican Todd Young projected as the winner there. ABC News and the Associated Press calling that one. He will be reelected over 2 challengers, Thomas McDermott Jr., the Democrat, and a Libertarian, James Senac. So we've got David Niven here. I want to have you introduce yourself a little bit. For those who don't know, you've been on with me at 7 o'clock tonight. You've been on with us a whole bunch in the run-up to this election. Let's talk about how important this election is. We know at the national level, this is a referendum. It always is in a midterm. But at a local level, there's a lot riding on this, too. A real quick opening thought from you.
Sure. You know, nationally, it's always an uphill battle for the president's party, and it certainly seems to be that way. Locally, though, there are some intriguing possibilities, including the 1st congressional district in Ohio, which could be a bright spot for Democrats, not just in Ohio, but nationally.
Yeah, and we've got crews covering all of these major races, including that Steve Chabot and Greg Landsman race. We also were watching the Ohio governor race, which we know has already been called, and that U.S. Senate race in Ohio, JD Vance against Congressman Tim Ryan. We have 3 of our reporters live for us right now. You see them here. We've got Anna Azalian with Tim Ryan. Up in Boardman, Ohio, Northeast Ohio. Brett Bagansky's with all the Ohio Republicans except for Steve Chabot. They're all gathered in Columbus. And then we've got Madeline Audley in Dayton with Nan Whaley. I'm going to start with you, Brett, if you can hear me. I know Mike DeWine was pretty modest a couple hours ago when you talked to him there at that party. What's changed with the projections out of the gate that he won?
It was just one of those things where he was saying he was cautiously optimistic, but the reason why I just got a little quiet out here is because the Lieutenant Governor John Husted has just taken the stage right now. So I guess any moment here we can hear from now Governor Mike DeWine, who just won his 2nd term. At least that's what we're expecting here right now. But, you know, he said he was just cautiously optimistic. And as we were going through all those polls earlier, he was 14 points ahead of his opponent. So there were many people who expected him to win, but he still was very modest about everything. So now with everything called so early, that's why there was a lot more confidence earlier tonight. Now, as far as the race for U.S. Senate between JD Vance and Tim Ryan, everything just seems to be a little bit where people are watching it a little bit closely and people are just kind of holding their breath right now.
All right, Brett, we appreciate that. We will let you get back, take some notes on what the Lieutenant Governor there has to say for us, and we are still waiting for Nan Whaley to call the governor and concede this race, so it's a perfect chance for us to jump in with Madeline Audley here in Dayton with Nan Whaley. We understand she's waiting on the Associated Press to call this race. They haven't done it yet. Everyone else has.
Evan, that's the message that we're getting from her camp at this hour. Important to note that Nan Whaley is not actually here in the building at her watch party tonight at the Montgomery County Democratic Party headquarters. They are waiting for the AP to call this race. We're actually told that Nan Whaley is at home. She will be here when that happens. But it's a full, small crowd here, but you can see more than 100 of her most loyal supporters in this room. Many still with smiles on their faces. It's pretty much business as usual in this watch party tonight. even though many are resigned to the fact that results are not trending the way that they were hoping for, they are happy at least to know that Nan Whaley, no matter what, has made history in this campaign as the first woman to secure a major party's nomination for governor in Ohio. I spoke to one voter. He tells me he just hopes that this inspires other young women to seek out leadership roles. Another voter tells me that even though Nan Whaley might not walk away as the next governor of Ohio, she's hopeful that Whaley will consider running for another office down the line. Now, voters in this room knew that this was going to be a really tough fight. I mean, remember, Ohio has not elected a Democratic governor since 2006. That's not to say, though, that the hope wasn't here, that tonight would be the night that they would do it. For now, live in Dayton, Madeline Ottley, WCPO 9 News.
All right, Madeline, thank you so much. So Brett mentioned this too. The other race we are looking at closely is that U.S. Senate race in Ohio, and we've been watching, David, I don't know if you've noticed this as these numbers came in. Tim Ryan jumped to a pretty sizable lead, not unexpected. Those early vote numbers are almost always going to go Democrat. But this lead has eroded to almost neck and neck already just in the last 20 minutes or so. We have Anna Azelian out with Tim Ryan right now, so I'm interested, Anna, if you're still with us here live, I'm interested how the mood has shifted in Boardman outside Youngstown. It is Ryan's hometown, and I know that he's been kind of focused in Northeast Ohio the past couple of days in the run-up to this. What are people talking about? What's that mood like?
We have heard several rounds of cheers as those early votes were coming in, showing Ryan in the lead. Now, we haven't heard any of those cheers for a few minutes now. Now, whether that's just because the TV's kind of cycling through other races and they're not talking about this specific race, or because, like you said, those election results, Vance is kind of catching up within the last little bit here. But things are still positive. There's a lot of positive energy here. I think people are still excited. We'll continue to see what might change or stay the same throughout the night, but definitely a big group of excited people here for the prospect of a Democrat taking over the Senate seat.
All right, Anna Azelian, we appreciate you, and as we've been talking to you live, that lead that Tim Ryan had built up with the early voting, David, now 20,000 votes separate the two of them in that race. So let's start with the U.S. Senate race here. Tim Ryan, at least it seemed to me, came out really strongly out of the primary, spent a lot of money, was all over our TV screens with ads in this case, and had, if you believe the polls, had a lead, a pretty strong lead, and now the polls have just kind of done this in favor of JD Vance. So what is at play here? Because there was no October surprise in this case.
Well, that's true. There wasn't a massive moment or a major gaffe that defined the late aspects of the campaign. I think the big story here is Tim Ryan made this race relevant. I mean, we're not talking about a race that was called within minutes, as you said, of the governor's race. So, this is an uphill battle for Democrats to win statewide in Ohio. And Tim Ryan succeeded in that first test, make this a real race. Now, close polls in Ohio generally favor Republicans, generally because their base vote in Ohio right now is bigger than it is for Democrats. But, the fact that we're talking about this race, the fact that reporters are waiting, to see what's going to happen at their campaign parties, that's a triumph for Tim Ryan. He did not fall into the trap, that's happened to Nan Whaley and happened to a lot of Democratic statewide candidates. Democrats, other than Sherrod Brown, haven't won in Ohio in the last 10 years. And I think that the important part of the storyline is we're talking about this race.
Yeah, and I think that is interesting too, because Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman had such a good working relationship. It was one of the things that we had Tanya O'Rourke ask both candidates, Tim Ryan and JD Vance, how do you build a coalition? Because Portman and Brown co-sponsored a ton of stuff together and seemed to work well together. Does that change regardless whether it's Tim Ryan or JD Vance? You kind of saw Tim Ryan play to the middle, even conservative. Does he become a Joe Manchin Democrat, right?
Well, I think there would be the potential for Tim Ryan to have an awful lot of overlap with Sherrod Brown on basic economic questions. But then he also certainly would have the potential to, to add to the Joe Manchin kind of power coalition in which, their votes can't be assumed on any issue. So they really have a decisive voice on an awful lot of things. It's a little harder to see JD Vance fully stepping into the Rob Portman role where, he can easily identify some areas of overlap with Senator Brown. I've heard Senator Brown describe his relationship with Rob Portman as something of a political arranged marriage, where they, they started off awfully awkward with each other, but they came to see something, in each other that they admired. And, I think the difference with Vance, of course, is he is much more of the fire-breathing kind of new style Republican than Rob Portman, who, comes to things, kind of the traditional Ohio Republican vein, not unlike George Voinovich, not unlike Kasich and DeWine, folks who were less, sort of overtly Trumpy in their, approach to politics.
Oh, I want to take a minute because I understand Governor DeWine is on the stage in Columbus right now, and so I think we have the ability to go out and take that so you can listen to the governor. This presumably his victory speech. That means Nan Whaley has called him, and that would mean that the AP has called now for Governor Mike DeWine. There he is on the stage in Columbus. Let's go ahead and listen in what he has to say. The governor speaking there. We're going to get that audio up here for you as soon as we can. I also want to tell you that here in the last minute or so, Thomas Massey, the congressional 4th district from Kentucky, that is a projected win and not a surprise there. We've got the governor speaking now. Let's go out to Governor Mike DeWine.
My friends, Ohioans have been through a lot, as all Americans have in the last few years. But we are a resilient, tough people, and we move forward. When I talk to businesses about coming to Ohio, and John and I do this all the time, we have a lot of good stories and a lot of good things to tell, whether it's our abundance of water, our location, our great infrastructure, and we go on and on. But in the end, it comes down to the most important thing, and that is our people. We have great people in Ohio. So to the people of Ohio, thank you. Thank you for giving us this chance. I want to thank my longtime girlfriend here. I made the mistake the other day. I introduced her and said we've been married 25 years, and I don't know, but it's really 55. And look, she's my best friend. She's someone who, Fran and I have known each other since first grade. And obviously, I wouldn't be here today having this opportunity to serve without her. She has, there's no one that can outwork her. There's no one who has more passion for what she does, and no one has more passion for children than Fran DeWine. And so we are blessed, and I'm blessed, and I think Ohio's blessed to have her as First Lady. She had a passion for literacy, getting children ready for kindergarten. And the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, those books are now reaching over half the children in the state of Ohio, 0 to 5. Let me thank our children, our grandchildren. Calvin makes an entrance here. Our children and our grandchildren and Fran's brothers and sisters. I thank them for their support over the years, but frankly, even more important, I thank them for the lessons that they have taught me and what I've learned from all of them and the inspiration I get from each one of them. I want to thank our volunteers. There are volunteers in the room today who were with us in that first race in 1976. That's pretty amazing. Thank you. Thank you. And for those of you who came after that And for all of you who have volunteered and helped us over the years, literally thousands of people who have done this, we're very, very, very grateful. To John and Tina, I thank you. We have a great team. They are a great team, and we have a great lieutenant governor. You know, when we started down this pathway, this partnership, and it is a partnership with John, myself, you never know how things will really work out. We thought they would be great. We thought the chemistry was there. We thought we complemented each other. But it's even better, frankly, than anyone could have ever imagined. John Husted makes a huge difference every single day for the people of the state of Ohio. And I am honored to have him by my side for 4 more years. My friends, this is our time. It's Ohio's time. It's Ohio's time in history. Things are coming our way. This is a great manufacturing state. And again, the thing, though, you can talk about all the assets that we have, but the most important thing is the people. Think about it. We're a state of people, we just get up in the morning, we go to work. We're people who get things done. We solve problems. We don't whine about them. We just go solve them. We make things. We invent things. We do things. That's the asset that we have. There's no better place to live. There is no better place in this world to live. There's no better place to live than Ohio. There's no better place to raise a family. There's no better place to start a business. There's no better place to grow a business. And right here in the Buckeye State, this is the place to be. But yet we have work to do. And we have unfinished business. I have a friend who always says, Mike, you got to remember to tell people why you're doing things and why. What's the why? And the why is this. We have unfinished business in front of us. We have things that we need to do. And the job of the governor is to lay before the people of the state of Ohio the unfinished business of the state. And in the next weeks and months ahead, I intend to continue to do that. Will continue to push forward and to lead and to talk about the things that we have to do. Our goal for every person in this state is for them to live up to their God-given potential, to remove all barriers that are hindering them from doing that. Because Ohio is the land of opportunity, and we must make sure that every Ohioan has that opportunity. We must make sure that every child, no matter where they're born, no matter who their parents are, has the opportunity to be up to speed by the time they get to kindergarten. Prenatal care, postnatal care for the moms, reading, good quality child care, all of these things so they get that start by the time they start kindergarten. But it's not just that. It's all the way through. Ohio will not be where it needs to be when we still have children who are not prepared. Ohio is not the state that we want it to be until we find all children who graduate from high school have some pathway. Whether that be a pathway through college, to college and through college, or whether that be a pathway in some other career, high tech, some of our tech schools, whatever that may be, but again, a pathway. And Ohio will not be the great state that can be when we leave people behind because they have an addiction problem, or when we leave people behind because they have an untreated mental health problem, and because it will not be the state it needs to be when if you have a child, you have to wait to get mental health assistance, or you have to wait and cannot get the help you need in regard to drug addiction. So a great state, we're moving forward, we have work to do. thank you for giving me the opportunity to lead you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that work. God bless Ohio. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine wins re-election handily. AP called it, and ABC called it, I should say, within about a minute of that being over. So we heard the governor in very typical Mike DeWine fashion here, right? First thing he did was thank his wife, Fran, and thank his kids. And then he got to Lieutenant Governor John Husted. And we heard him kind of go through some of the talking points he's had in this campaign. And that's been, we have unfinished business. We've got to take care of the kids in the state. We've got to take care of the families in the state and deal with mental health and addiction services. And he really hinted at some of the work he's done on bringing jobs to Ohio. You've got the major Intel announcement, a lot of manufacturing he talked about here. Bring David Niven back in to talk us through this one. No surprises here from the governor, but what do you think the path forward is in a second Mike DeWine term?
Well, as notable as what you just said he did talk about is what he didn't talk about. He didn't talk about abortion. And, you know, Ohio is on the verge potentially of a full abortion ban based on the comments of the leadership of the Ohio Senate and House. He didn't talk about preventing gun violence, you know, which is an issue in which he did a rather severe turnaround in his first term, at one point committing to efforts to reduce, you know, the availability of guns, and then later signing bills that went in the opposite direction.
It's in part why Nan Whaley jumped into this race, right?
Right, and so, you know, one of the things that's fascinating about this race almost is the Houdini aspect, where there are issues on which he is distinctly in the minority among Ohio voters in his positions, but he's going to win a massive victory here. I mean, this is a career valedictory, you know, win, while at the same time, you know, he couldn't win a majority in the primary. And, you know, he doesn't represent a majority on a lot of these issues. It's just a fascinating triumph, you know, against the fundamentals. You know, he's walking out here a big winner.
You know, that's interesting, too, because I was at Nan Whaley's watch party when she won in the primary. She beat John Cranley, the former mayor of Cincinnati, and she reached out specifically to some of the voters, the Republican voters, who didn't like Mike DeWine. They didn't like him because of the lockdowns. They didn't like him because of some of the scandals in the State House and his ties to that First Energy scandal. And she said, look, I don't like any of this either. Reach out. Clearly did not work for her tonight.
No, some of those folks obviously held their nose and voted DeWine.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's... Let's be
lesser
fair.
of two evils, right? And,
I mean,
and
yeah.
if you have a choice between an R and a D in the
For
state
those
of Ohio,
folks, yes, for those base Republican voters. Let's be fair to Nan Whaley. You know, one Democrat has won the governor's office in Ohio since 1990. This is an uphill battle, you know, for a Democrat to succeed in Ohio right now in a governor's race. The only Democrat who's been winning really statewide in the last 10 years is Sherrod Brown. If you don't have the unique qualities that he has and ability to present yourself, this is a difficult task. But one of the things that I think really defines this race is, you know, Nan Whaley didn't run a race that was particularly distinctive. You know, Tim Ryan ran a race that doesn't look like the average Democrat. Nan Whaley ran a race that looks like Democratic campaigns all across the country.
Right.
And that's not enough in Ohio in 2022 for a Democrat.
I want to ask you something about, because I mentioned he thanked his kids in this. One of his kids is running for state Supreme Court. That has been an issue in the last couple of weeks. We've seen campaign ads directed at the two of them. If you watch Channel 9, you've seen them calling into question, look, Pat's ruling on the redistricting that his dad's involved with as governor, and you have all this issue. It's a tight race right now. I'm looking at the results, or again, early results here as they come in. But Pat DeWine is up right now by about, I would say, 50,000 votes, 70,000 votes here. Do people actually care about that, I guess, is my question?
One of the unfortunate aspects of this election will be a message that you can pretty well get away with anything. You know, I mean, we have literally the biggest, you know, political bribery scandal in the history of Ohio, you know, and there don't seem to be any electoral consequences for it. This is the kind of thing like a
householder ran unopposed, and there's been no consequence.
When he first ran for re-election, and then none of the folks in the state house who voted for this. Obviously, Governor DeWine, whose team participated, in the creating of the bill and passing it, none of them are paying any consequences. And on the redistricting front, the folks, including the governor, including Secretary of State LaRose, including Auditor Keith Faber, all likely to roll to big victories tonight. So that combination, this is like, in elementary school where teachers talk about, good choices and bad choices. These are folks who look like they're going to get away with some bad choices along the way.
And I also think, though, that there's probably a rebuking of some of what, and this may be, correct me if I'm wrong, is there any message, broader message for Democrats? Nan Whaley ran very hard on abortion. A lot of Democrats have done this since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. She ran hard on that. She ran hard on sort of a populist, like, look, Mike DeWine has been in office as long as I've been alive kind of message. Is this a rejection of that? Does this mean that anyone running on abortion today or in this campaign, maybe this was not the hot button issue that people thought it was?
I don't think we can make that assumption, in part because Nan Whaley never broke through. One of the things that you saw, even in very recent polls, when folks were asked, do you approve or disapprove of these candidates? Nan Whaley had a 50% non-response rate, as in half of Ohio had no opinion of her. So, when you say, did this issue fail, or, did that approach fail? Well, what mostly failed was just the first step of getting attention. And again, this isn't easy. It's an uphill battle for a Democrat to win in Ohio right now. But she didn't make it through that first step. And that's why I'm saying there's a huge distinction between Whaley and Ryan in that Ryan achieved relevance. No matter what, whether he wins or loses, he ran a strong campaign that achieved relevance and made the other side fight. Whereas, if you look at fundamentally what DeWine's been up to lately, if you follow like his activities over the last month, he's been to an awful lot of ball games. I mean, he's been to an awful lot of leisure activities. He wasn't even campaigning full time to keep his job because he didn't have to.
That's a great transition. I do want to let you all know, if you're just streaming with us, we just watched and listened to Governor Mike DeWine just won re-election pretty handily in the state of Ohio. I mean, I can give you, we're scrolling these results here for you, but I can tell you right now that, it's 60-40. He won 60% of the vote at least at this point. Nan Whaley's going to speak here in about 7 minutes. That's according to her campaign. So we will bring that to you live in part here in about 7 minutes. About 9:35 is when we're told she's going to speak her concession speech here. In the meantime, I also want to let you know, Brad Wenstrup, not a surprise there. AP is projecting he will win re-election in the 2nd Congressional District in Ohio. That is not a huge surprise there. He beat Samantha Meadows. She's an EMT, ran heavy on gun violence in that case. So a couple of things. Let's get you caught up if you're just joining us. Races that have been called already here. Just told you in the last few minutes, Brad Wenstrup, the Republican incumbent in Ohio's 2nd congressional race, he's projected to win re-election in this case. 2 Senate races have been called. Kentucky, Rand Paul will win re-election, the Republican incumbent in that case. He's served since 2010. Kind of came in on that Tea Party wave. He has beat Charles Booker, a former state lawmaker in Kentucky there. In Indiana, Republican incumbent Todd Young wins re-election. He's served since 2017 in the U.S. Senate there. He beat Democrat Thomas McDermott Jr. and a Libertarian candidate in that case, James Seniak. We've got those, I said Brad Wenstrup, Thomas Massey in Kentucky's 4th Congressional District. Thomas Massey here, and this has beat a Democrat, Matt Lehman, a healthcare consultant. Massey's been in since 2012. He also beat out an independent in that race. Ethan Osborne's a Marine and a union organizer, ran on a pretty liberal independent race there. So we're starting to get some of these come in as we wait now to hear from Nan Whaley. While we wait to hear from Nan Whaley, I know, David, you and I have talked about this, that the race that certainly we've kind of been using as a barometer for how things may trend for the night across Ohio and maybe even across the country has been Ohio's first congressional race, and that's the Steve Chabot race. Steve Chabot seemingly can't be beat since the one time he did lose in,
2008.
Yeah, in the early 2000s, late 2000s there. But, Aftab Piraval is the current mayor of Cincinnati. People thought he was the Democrats' best chance to win, and there was a lot of enthusiasm in that case. Didn't do a number on him. Kate Schroeder, people thought there was a really good chance to flip that seat for Democrats. Didn't do a number. Steve Chabot just has staying power in this district, but now it's a whole new district.
Well, that's right. I mean, he's had staying power in part as a reflection of his political abilities, but in part thanks to the largesse of the map drawers who, gave him Warren County, which has helped, solidify his political career for the last 10 years. What's different this time, he still has Warren County in his district, but instead of the somewhat more Republican parts of Hamilton County, he has the city of Cincinnati and all of it in his district. And so it's a different animal. And so I think one of the intriguing storylines here, as we see Mike DeWine roll to a huge victory and likely carry with him the Republican ticket statewide, there's the potential for that first district to go Democratic against the grain here in Ohio, against the grain nationwide, and amusingly enough, against the grain of the great gerrymandering scandal. All the time and effort put into drawing districts by a Republican redistricting commission, including DeWine, and they drew a first district that was plausible for Democrats, and they may find for the first time in 10 years, not a single seat has changed hands in Ohio for the last 10 years. We could have one changing hands tonight and have it change toward the Democrats.
And, the initial numbers were really strong toward Landsman. Again, that's not a surprise.
That's early voting.
It's eroded away a little bit. We have reporters out doing covering this race for us. We've got Jake Ryle with Steve Chabot's campaign. We've got Valerie Lyons with Greg Landsman. They're both in downtown Cincinnati tonight. And we want to actually give you a little sense of how things are going out there. In that instance, we want to start with Jake Ryle, who's with the Chabot campaign. Right in Pendleton at Hamilton County GOP headquarters, because I want to get a little sense of how things may be going there, given how close this potentially could be. So Jake gave us a little message and a little sense of how things are going there. We'll send it out for Jake here.
Well, hey there, we are inside of the Hamilton County GOP headquarters. We're expecting to see Representative Steve Chabot in a short time. We did catch up with him a little bit earlier on this morning when he voted at the Westwood Public Library. We know he also spent some time today with Senator Rob Portman at another location in Delhi. Now, Representative Chabot said he felt most Ohio voters are going to be focusing on two things: the inflation rate and how hard it's hit many Americans in the wallet, and overall public safety.
They believe that Americans ought to have a right to live in neighborhoods that they believe they feel safe. And right now, in many neighborhoods, that's not the case, especially in the city that I call home, Cincinnati. There's a lot of neighborhoods here right now that people really kind of looking over their shoulder, and that shouldn't be the case.
Now, we do anticipate seeing Representative Chabot as the numbers are going to be tallied up. As soon as we have that, we'll be sure to pass it along to you. For now, Jake Ryle, WCPO 9 News.
I heard from Jake there. I looked it up. I actually lied to you a little bit here. That race is not nearly as close as it was sort of trending as we went on. Greg Landsman has managed to hold on to a pretty strong lead here. It's about 56% of the vote he has to Chabot's 43% right now, and that has slowed down. The eroding of that lead has slowed down a little bit. Valerie Lyons is with the Landsman campaign. They're downtown Cincinnati, Queen City Exchange here tonight as well. Certainly imagine things there are pretty optimistic. We'll toss it out to Valerie Lyons with the Landsman campaign.
Democratic candidate Greg Landsman had a busy day, stopping at several polling locations to connect with voters one last time. We caught up with him twice, once in the morning and again shortly before polls closed. And his outlook never wavered, confident in his campaign and its impact with voters.
I feel great.
Greg Landsman in good spirits as his months-long campaign comes to a close. After first casting his own ballot in the morning, the Cincinnati council member spent Election Day sharing smiles and fist bumps with voters before they cast their own.
I think showing up is everything, right? So whether they've already made up their mind or not, the fact that you're in their community and you're talking to them, one, it helps me better understand where folks are. And it helps them appreciate, hey, this guy cares, and I do.
Landsman, a former public school teacher, is running for Congress, vying for Ohio's District 1 seat, currently held by opponent and Republican incumbent Steve Chabot.
He's been there for almost 30 years, and folks know that, he's part of the problem, and they want a new congressman, and they get one.
That's a sentiment shared by Landsman's supporters, who say they want change.
That's why. That's why, right there on the back of my T-shirts.
Eager to voice their votes in a pivotal election.
Knocking at 100 doors a day for the past 4 weeks, that door to door, 100 doors a day. So I thank, everybody for out there doing what they're doing, and thanks for being here and getting it in. I got it in. I voted.
Landsman's platform focuses on 3 key points: advocating for abortion and reproductive rights, better worker wages and benefits, and addressing inflation. Reporting in downtown Cincinnati, Valerie Lyons, WCPO 9 News.
Both of those. What's interesting to me as I was sitting watching Valerie's piece there, something you said about Republicans in Columbus may also have an effect locally with Democrats here, and that is getting away with bad deeds. I was a little surprised we didn't hear more from the Chabot campaign about the Gang of Five, the text message open meetings violation scandal. You heard a little bit, Greg Landsman's a criminal. He's not going to fight criminals because he's a criminal too. Do you think did the Gang of Five matter?
I don't think it mattered. I think, it's the kind of thing that's an embarrassment. It's the kind of thing, that you certainly don't want to be talking about, but it isn't necessarily the kind of thing that defines a campaign or, defines a person. I think one of the aspects of this race that's notable is Chabot has had some success in the past with, defining his opponent to the point where, that opponent couldn't come back, couldn't make a name for themselves, couldn't define their own agenda. And he wasn't able to do that in this race. And part of the storyline is running against a strong opponent. I mean, you don't win Cincinnati City Council races without being able to campaign, because that's a tough race. It's a tough race.
It is boots on the ground, right?
And against this huge field of candidates, and you have to work hard to do that. And then the second thing, of course, is this is a different district. So this is not as friendly a district. This district was won by Joe Biden, in 2020. So this is a district that Democrats should win unless the wave is so big that they can't possibly respond. And at the moment, the indications are it's not a great year for Democrats at all, but it's not a year that's going to take out strong Democrats. It's taking out Democrats in places we don't expect Democrats to win.
Yeah, Greg Landsman still up right now over Steve Chabot pretty significantly in this as things come in here. We are standing by for Nan Whaley at the moment. She was supposed to speak here right about this time in a concession speech. We already heard the victory speech from Mike DeWine winning re-election as governor. Nan Whaley, the former mayor of Dayton, expected any minute. We'll dip into her concession speech a little bit once she takes the stage. So just if you just started streaming with us, that's kind of where we stand. I'm Evan Millward from WCPO 9. This is the guy we go to for politics all the time, David Niven from UC. Really good insight into how things are going, especially because it feels like everyone's talked about this is the year, this is the midterm that it could be a crushing red wave. And the one race where we're really not seeing that is the Ohio 1st Congressional District.
I mean, one of the interesting things is in 1982, John Kasich, later governor, later presidential candidate, was the only Republican in the nation to take a House seat away from a Democratic incumbent in what was a very bad year for Republicans. And this could potentially be, in the 1st District, one of the only, or possibly even the only, challenger to take a House seat away from an incumbent in what is, of course, looking to be a bad year for Democrats. So
Ohio politics.
Ohio
going
politics,
to Ohio
exactly
politics, right?
Exactly right.
That is, what a good tidbit. That is interesting. We are, as you are watching now live, you see Cheryl Stevens, the lieutenant governor candidate with Nan Whaley, taking the stand there in Dayton, Ohio, in downtown Dayton. A concession speech after a race that was called within a minute of polls closing in Ohio. You see her. We're waiting for Nan Whaley to come out, and we'll dip into that as you hear that. Want to talk a little bit more. We've talked a lot about that governor's race that we're watching there. It was not a surprise by any stretch. What I guess I'm curious about is Nan Whaley beat John Cranley so badly in the primary that some people said, okay, maybe she is going to be a threat to Mike DeWine's second term, that maybe there is some momentum here. And again, not a race where we saw like an October surprise or any. There was nothing that really changed about either of these candidates. Nothing salacious came out here. Was this just a kind of a doomed candidacy, a Democrat running for governor of Ohio in this day and age from the start?
I wouldn't say doomed, but it's a situation that calls for something extraordinary. So it's not hopeless. You have to do everything right. You have to run an extraordinary campaign in all phases. This is, like trying to get into Harvard on a, B- grades. For a Democrat, you can't win statewide on a B- campaign. And I think Nan Whaley was a successful and well-respected mayor in Dayton. And I think we see a couple of things. It's hard for a Democrat to win statewide. It's hard to gain statewide name recognition. She was known in Dayton, but that doesn't mean that she's going to be known across the state. And that's a tough slog. And one of the things that we're seeing, of course, is because Republicans have dominated those statewide races, they build that name recognition running for those undercard races, and then they move up the ladder. Democrats have had no success winning in those races, so they are out of candidates who have a statewide following. So, it's a tough build when you say, I need to be known across all these media markets. I need to be known, starting almost from zero. It's expensive, it's difficult, it's time-consuming. I think in the end, you could say she ran a decent campaign, but decent's not, anywhere near good enough.
And now we're going to hear from Nan Whaley live at her watch party here in downtown Dayton. You're watching that live. We're going to hear from her what she has to say about that campaign that was decent but not good enough. Let's go ahead and listen in.
Thank you, Dayton. It is so good to be home. So good. I want to start by thanking my husband, Sam, who has been with me on this journey from the beginning. Thank you to my parents, my brother, David, my sister-in-law, Emily, my niece, Abigail, Nanette, and Teddy, my nephew. Thank you for that, always supporting me. Thank you, guys. And thank you to my amazing, awesome, badass running mate, Cheryl Stevens. Who is a true champion for Ohio communities. Thank you to my awesome campaign team, led by the great Brian Swardra. Thank you. Who many have been with me for every step of the way these last 20 months. And thank you to everyone who supported this campaign. All of you who chipped in your time and money because you believed Ohio deserved better. This is obviously not the result we were hoping for. A few minutes ago, I called Governor DeWine to congratulate him and wish him and Fran good luck in another term. Even when we don't get the outcome we hope for, it's vital that we respect our democracy. Now look, this is a tough night. I'm not going to stand here and sugarcoat things. I'm disappointed, and I know you are too. And after a tough loss like this, you might feel like giving up. And hey, no one would really blame you. There's a lot that's pretty broken about Ohio and our whole country. And there's a lot that's not. I stand before all of you and every little girl watching this at home as the first woman ever nominated for governor in the state of Ohio. And I sure as hell know I won't be the last, no matter how. No matter how hard the good old boys in both parties and the media try to hold us all back. Despite trailing in every single poll, we raised millions of dollars, not from special interests looking to call in a favor, but from nearly 30,000 everyday folks willing to chip in a few bucks to make their state a better place. I traveled to every single county in this state, all 88 of them. And when I met folks who didn't agree with me on everything, we could agree that every community and family deserved real opportunity. Despite a broken state government and politicians working to divide us, it's still clear to me that we have more in common than not. We're going to hear from folks that it's time to write off Ohio as some backwater where extremism is just the way things are. But I refuse to accept that. I've said all along that you've got a choice, Ohio, and that's still true tonight. You can accept the status quo in our state. You can accept the extremists who have rigged the system and the State House, and you can accept decline. Or you can keep working for something better, even when you get knocked down, because our families and our communities are worth it. We can keep working for an economy that works for every Ohioan, whether you live in Dayton or Cleveland Heights or Marietta. We can keep working to root out the rampant corruption that we know has infected this state house. And we can keep working to pass common sense gun reform and make all of our communities more safe. We can keep working to raise the minimum wage, to pass universal pre-K, and every other common sense policy that working families need in this state. And we can keep fighting for abortion rights. Because we already know what's coming our way. A complete abortion ban. A ban that will prosecute doctors, subpoena medical records, and kill women. But we still have the power to stop it. Since Roe was overturned, I've said we need to take this issue directly to voters with a ballot initiative to codify abortion rights in the Ohio State Constitution. That starts now. If you care about the future of this state, we need you in this fight. Tonight, we can mourn this loss, but tomorrow, we get back to work. The last 20 months have been filled with the highest of highs and some of the lowest of lows. And while tonight wasn't the high we had hoped for, I still believe in Ohio. I still believe that our citizens deserve better than what they're getting. And I believe in the people of this state to get us there. I'm going to keep fighting for Ohio, and I sure hope you all will still join me. Thank you so very much.
All right, so that was Nan Whaley's concession speech. She is behind Governor Mike DeWine. That race has been called. She called him to congratulate him. Something that jumped out to me, it's something that she said in her victory speech in the primary, almost word for word, is that I refuse to believe that Ohio is just some backwater with a bunch of extremists. I refuse to accept that. You should refuse to accept any of this. That was not necessarily a great campaign thing for her to run in a general election on, and clearly she's going to lose this by almost 30 points at the rate she's going. She's currently down 800,000 votes almost. What we do want to tell you about here is a big change that's happened in the Ohio U.S. Senate race. We've got two crews out working for you there. Anna Azalian's with Tim Ryan in Boardman in Northeast Ohio. Brett Baganski's with the JD Vance campaign and all the Ohio Republicans in downtown Columbus. JD Vance has just pulled into the lead on this. So, Brett, I want to toss it out to you first. There's got to have been a mood change. Look, Mike DeWine is at that party too, so everyone was pretty happy with that early call. What's happening now? What are you hearing from the Republicans there about Vance taking this lead?
You know, they haven't really been talking about it. So there was another person that just took the stage. I apologize because I forgot, I didn't get his name as you were talking to me. But, you know, there was a big commanding lead in just the last 20 minutes where JD Vance went ahead. It was Tim Ryan who was ahead basically all day as some of those early turns were coming in. And, you know, earlier they had on a cable news outlet as they were looking at some of those early returns and reacting during that whole thing. But ever since then, they have not been doing that. But as we are getting some of these early returns, and it looks like JD Vance, even though those returns are still coming in and it's still early, 49% of the precincts reporting, he's got about 145,000 leads over Tim Ryan right now. And it's just, it's very fascinating just about how this has just quickly gone into JD Vance, and just it seems like his lead is just going more and more minute by the minute there, Evan.
Yeah, Brett, it was something the polls in the last week or two told us would probably happen here. So while we have our reporters up, I want to get a sense from Anna Azalian up in Boardman with Tim Ryan's campaign. Are they worried, Anna? What's happening? What are you? I know it's been pretty quiet there all evening. So this is a much more subdued crowd. What are you hearing there?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Evan. There were a few moments earlier, I told you, we heard some cheers as those early election results were showing Ryan in the lead, but we're definitely not hearing those cheers anymore. Now, I wouldn't say there's a huge mood shift just yet. There are some people starting to look maybe a little bit more concerned, some people that are starting to leave, but it is, you know, getting late, especially if they've had a long day here on Election Day. But we'll stick around and kind of keep you updated on how things change as we get more and more results. We're at a roughly half of precincts reporting right now, Evan.
All right, Anna, and thanks for keeping an eye on that for us. So we're going to wait and see how this shakes out. This is going to be a close race, another close race. I'll bring David Niven back in here with us now because another close race. The New York Times has just called maybe the closest in the country is the one we were talking about a few minutes ago before Nan Whaley took the stage there, and that is this 1st congressional district in Ohio. Greg Landsman still up on Steve Chabot here, but clearly there is momentum for Republicans. I think most people knew that was coming, particularly in Ohio, and he's holding his own in this district, though that is a district that is now went from being almost drawn for a Republican win to much more even, if not drawn for a Democrat to win, right?
Well, one of the interesting things about the redistricting reform in Ohio, which overall failed miserably because it produced
still being litigated, right?
Well, yeah, we're voting under maps that the Ohio Supreme Court found were unconstitutional. But in any case, one of the rules that is new for this year is certain cities can't be split up into multiple congressional districts based on the size of their population. Cincinnati is one of those cities. So in the old map, there was a zigzagging line that cut through more than a dozen Cincinnati neighborhoods. In the new map, the entire city's in one district. And that changes the flavor of things and flipped it from a district that was largely friendly to Republicans to one that's just the tiniest bit friendly to Democrats. And even in this year, and certainly across Ohio, it doesn't look to be an outstanding day for Democrats. This could be one of the major bright spots for Democrats across Ohio and actually even across the nation.
AP has just now, here again in the last 30 minutes, made the call for Mike DeWine in Ohio. JD Vance has taken the lead in Ohio. You've seen the down-ticket Republicans in the lead, Frank LaRose, Robert Sprague. So this is one to watch. All right, I want to pivot a little bit because we've talked for about 40 minutes about Ohio. We told you that Todd Young has been reelected in Indiana as Indiana's senator. He's a Republican incumbent. Rand Paul in Kentucky's been reelected, a Republican incumbent. I want to talk about the major amendment that everyone was talking about in Kentucky, kind of watching this particularly in the aftermath of the vote that happened in Kansas. This is an issue about abortion. It's an amendment that would basically remove abortion rights, as it were, from any kind of protection under Kentucky's Constitution. So here's where it stands right now. This is Amendment 2, and it is within about 90,000 votes against. So right now, Kentucky voters are narrowly saying, look, we don't we don't agree with this amendment.
Right. So a vote no is actually a vote for abortion rights, in effect. And
Right.
no,
Yeah. The
and no
wording
is
can
winning.
get kind of funny in this. So, and again, you're going to see Republicans in Kentucky probably sweep again here tonight, at least certainly in our viewing area here. What does this say? You and I talked off camera about a split vote that you could see happen. Kansas just did this. Kansas is deep red. Kentucky is considered fairly deep red. And yet they're saying, we don't want this in the Constitution. What does that say?
Well, it's fascinating how far apart voters' issue priorities and their candidate priorities can be. And, we see this, not just on abortion. You put a minimum wage question on the ballot and voters will overwhelmingly vote yes, even as they'll vote for candidates who don't support, a minimum wage. And Mike DeWine is just a fantastic example of, add up his issue positions one after another, and they're not where a majority of Ohioans are, and yet he's going to win a massive victory. And so, part of the storyline, of course, is, voters have a whole host of considerations when they're going in there, and it's not all issues. And think about how Mike DeWine presents himself. He's like Ohio's grandpa.
Right.
Going to hand you a slice of pie.
Fran will literally hand you a baked good.
Exactly. Hand you a baked good. He's not out there, hitting hard about, these kinds of issues that really do, strike people. So part of it is, the triumph of candidates who run, if not issue-less, on very carefully selected slices of their issue positions.
One of the things we heard from some of the pundits, right, in the last couple of weeks was this is going to come down to it's the economy, stupid, and that any kind of blue bump that was expected because of the abortion issue had faded away and suddenly wasn't that important because inflation is so bad and prices are so high on everything. Gas prices have gone back up. Grocery prices are through the roof. You have record inflation. The abortion issue, and I remember covering it, particularly in Kentucky in the past 10 years, and I learned that abortion was a much bigger issue than a lot of people would talk about for a very long time politically.
Sure.
Matt Bevin, when he won, it was incredible the number of people at his watch parties and at his campaign events who had signs, and abortion was their issue. And that's what they were voting on. They may not have been voting for Matt Bevin, but they were voting on his abortion stance. Now we get a constitution. Can two things be not mutually exclusive, right? That you don't necessarily, you're going to vote for a Republican who wants an abortion ban, but you don't want the government perceived overreach of enshrining it in the Constitution?
Well, that's clearly what happened in Ohio. There is almost no constituency for an abortion ban. About 10% in the polls say they want to ban abortion. And yet Mike DeWine is going to roll to a massive victory despite, being open to a complete abortion ban. And part of the dynamic, of course, is, you mentioned inflation. There's a worldwide inflation crunch, but people are reminded of it every single day.
Yep.
There isn't.
You can't escape it.
A day that doesn't go by without seeing some evidence of it. Abortion matters to people, but it doesn't necessarily, jump in front of you every single day and demand your attention. So some of this is just, competing attention spans. And then some of this, of course, is, folks are comfortable with a certain amount of, dissonance between the issue positions and their chosen candidate. And, Mike DeWine, it's really a fascinating example. He projects an image. He doesn't project an image as an extremist. In fact, the extremists in his party are kind of skeptical of him.
Yeah, they don't like him much.
Right. And they booed him at the Trump rally the other day.
Last night. Yep.
And yet, he's actually with them issue for issue. He's actually their guy.
Yeah. I guess then what this says to me about how close this is in Kentucky, where this may go down, this amendment may not happen. It may get voted down. So it may be a matter of when you put it to something that is chiseled in stone, figuratively, in a constitution, people say, well, I don't know, that's too much, that's too far.
Well, I think if abortion had been on the ballot in Ohio, I have every reason to expect the pro-abortion side would have won, even as Mike DeWine rolled to a big victory. That voters could easily have done, that sort of contradictory vote if they had had the opportunity.
That split vote, yeah. So, it comes down to a matter of your candidates. You're going to vote for someone on more on an issue of inflation, something that affects you every day. Crime became an issue that we saw, and actually, well, I'll use that as a transition to talk about Ohio's constitutional amendments, which are, this is not a close race or a close vote, I should say. Ohio has two amendments. The first one dealing with bail and bond and public safety being a factor. It's actually a Hamilton County case that set this up. The Supreme Court ruled you don't need to factor in public safety when you're setting bond for someone. And you had prosecutors, the Hamilton County prosecutor Joe Dieters came out against it. I think the Lucas County prosecutor came out against it, campaigned against it for this amendment. The flip side argued this is redundant. We shouldn't be giving taking something from the Supreme Court to give it to state lawmakers. Right now, this overwhelmingly, I mean, by about 1.5 million votes, is going to pass and be added to the Constitution. So crime clearly is an issue here too, and these are sort of the Republican candidate talking points: inflation, economy, crime.
Sure, and part of this issue is just there was no organized opposition, and it sounds good on paper. So, people are going to reflexively vote yes. The practical consequences of this aren't that great. I mean, it's not as if Ohioans, were living in a world in which everybody was set free and there was no bail. I mean, the real effect of issue 1 passing will be there won't be reforms and experiments. And there were a lot, even Republican legislators, who were interested in, is there a better way to do this?
Right.
And the answer now will be no. This is the way we're going to do this. We're going to have an old school bail system where if you don't have the money, you're essentially, out of luck.
Yeah, and that was something that came down to, this is a wealth issue. This is a class issue. It will likely fail. I'm a little surprised no one has called that, but, there's that. The issue 2, Amendment 2 here, in Ohio is a real wonky one that is almost narrowly targeted to Yellow Springs, near where I grew up in Greene County, which is Mike DeWine's backyard, right? He talks about he had an ice cream social at Young's Jersey Dairy up in Yellow Springs, I think this weekend ahead of the election, but they wanted to allow a handful of non-citizens who were living in that community to vote, and Frank LaRose, who was going to win re-election as Secretary of State, came in and said, no, that's not how we do it. And this is also, I think, no surprise to your point. It's something that sounds good on paper, but is fairly narrowly targeted.
Well, it's essentially redundant. You already have to be a citizen to vote in Ohio, and no non-citizen had voted under even Yellow Springs' proposal.
Right.
The real consequence of issue 2, though, because of the way it's worded, it will end Ohio's practice of allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries if they were going to be 18 before the general election, because now the wording of the amendment specifically requires that you be 18. So that's kind of the accidental consequence. Nobody proposed this as a way to stop 17-year-olds from voting, and yet that's where this is going to wind up. Both these issues, though, very reflexive votes. There's no real organized opposition. Nobody enunciated why not do this, and so of course I want bail and I want citizens only to vote, and so these are both going to win overwhelming support.
I want to get you another update on another race that's projected here. We haven't forgotten about you, Indiana. I know we talked a lot about Ohio. We've talked a little bit about Kentucky. Indiana, Greg Pence, it's Mike Pence's brother. He will win re-election for the 6th congressional district there. He's served in that district since 2018. He beats Cynthia Worth, the Democrat challenger there. She's a former science expert in Congress. And those results are actually just came in. It's a decisive victory by more than 50,000 votes. He's got 68% of the vote. So Greg Pence will be reelected to the 6th congressional district in Indiana. So again, right now, I don't know that I see a surprise in any of these called or projected races yet. It's been Republican win, and they've all been incumbents. So really, it's all eyes on the 1st congressional district. We've talked a bit about that. David Niven here with us. Again, if you're just joining our stream here, you can see results are right there. I feel like the Brady Bunch. are scrolling through, you'll see any number of the 300 plus races we're covering for you here on WCPO 9 tonight. So let's stop down for a second. And David, I want to get a sense of where this fits in the big picture. We're talking about the balance of power at stake in Congress, what this means for the president's agenda, what it potentially means for 2024's presidential race. There has been really not a surprise nationwide yet tonight.
You know, that's fair to say. You know, Republicans have won races, the ones you just mentioned, including Greg Pence, they were expected to win. Democrats have won races they were expected to win for the most part. You know, we're going to have to wait, and in some cases, you know, we might be up a few days waiting on, you know, the Pennsylvania Senate race, and depending on the outcome in Georgia in their Senate race, that could actually go to a runoff. So we could be waiting a couple weeks for the ultimate answer to, you know, who runs the Senate. But, you know, sort of your big picture question of how does all this matter? Well, some huge consequences. The Republicans very likely to wind up with a U.S. House majority. So there really won't be much opportunity for President Biden to advance an agenda. You know, anything important that he will have, you know, gotten through Congress will have to have already been done. The big question mark with the Senate will be, you know, if there's a Republican majority, that really in practice these days means an end to being able to appoint judges. It means an end, you know, to the, you know, those kinds of sort of basic nuts and bolts of governing. You know, bottom line, it's not just a Biden situation, but, you know, we've seen presidents really almost be limited to that first 2-year window. Like the big things that happened during the Obama administration, even though it was 8 years long, were really in the first 2 years. If you don't get it through then, you know, the way the fickle American voter has worked,
Boy, we've
generally switched, you know, we've switched directions almost immediately. You know, we happen to be on the Franklin Roosevelt administration in my class this week, and it's almost impossible for students to imagine he was elected, re-elected, re-elected, and then re-elected. You know, we don't even give, you know, presidents a full 4 years before we take their party out of office these days.
You know, that is sort of society, right? I want it done now, and if it's not done now, I'm moving on. I'm over it. I'm done. I'm interested. We've heard from the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. We've heard from any number of Republicans running that they will vote for nothing that the president puts in front of them or the Democrats put in front of them. There's usually a string attached, right? I think I heard from someone in Arizona, one of the candidates, unless there's a border, shoring up the border, I'm not even entertaining something if I get elected. Is that, if this is as much of a red wave as is expected tonight, it's clearly a referendum. How much of a mandate is it for a change, and what kind of change does that look like in Washington? You know, you hear from the Democrats, we got infrastructure done. Mm-hmm. We got the rescue plan done. We've done things that in a normal functioning world, in theory, would be bipartisan, but each had things attached that made them not bipartisan or bipartisan in name only, right? You got just enough votes to make it bipartisan. So is it a mandate? Is it a referendum? What word do we use for this?
Well, I certainly wouldn't say it's a mandate, in part because, you know, the Republicans really ran just against President Biden. They didn't run on, you know, here's our 10-point plan to address these things.
It's sort of what the Democrats did in the presidential race, right?
Sure,
like,
just
I'm
run as an
not
alternative.
I'm not
Absolutely.
Donald Trump. Right?
Run as an alternative. So I don't think it's a mandate. I do think, however, they'll be empowered to really play a game of chicken. And, you know, among the powers they'll have is the capacity to try and, you know, refuse the debt ceiling increases that are just a natural part of keeping the government open. So they'll be able to play this brinksmanship where they refuse to fund government and then essentially make demands. And that game is, it's an ugly one. It's not an efficient one. You know, it comes at a cost of, you know, potential government shutdowns and disorder and all that sort of thing. So, you know, we've seen this in the past. And when Speaker Boehner was in office, you saw him struggle, his impulse was to keep a functioning government going, but his caucus didn't want to. And, if the Republicans gain a majority, as they're likely to, and if Kevin McCarthy becomes the speaker, as he's likely to, he doesn't have Boehner's impulse to try and keep the trains going. So it could well be the ugliest, game of back and forth brinksmanship that we've ever had.
Yeah, the temperature of the room in the final weeks of this campaign has really been at a level that I can't remember. Every election recently sure seems like someone said, this is the biggest, most important election of our lifetime, and everything's going to change. But this, you heard it from both sides. The future of our democracy is at stake. The future of our country is at stake. The temperature of the room right now is oppressive. Can anyone get anything done, regardless of who wins tonight?
Well, I mean, it's certainly different, and it's alarming. And I think the bottom line is no, nobody can get anything done. And that, it's one of the ironies of ironies. We fight in these elections, and we care about them desperately. And the bottom line is, because of a variety of things, nobody wins big landslides, when you think about the overall outcome of things. No presidential candidate has won a 10-point victory in the last 30 years, a 10-point victory. So everybody, whoever wins, Democrat or Republican, they win by a narrow margin. Then when we get them in, as we just said a moment ago, we tend to put the other party back in charge very quickly. So we have this kind of zigzag where you're never quite powerful enough to fully enact your agenda. And the bottom line for most voters, of course, is a sense of frustration because, they vote, they want action, they want results, and yet they don't vote anybody in by a big enough margin to get the very results they, claim to want.
And we are in what is now sort of the long slog of waiting for some results. So we are going to start the process of wrapping up. And in the process of wrapping up, I'll ask you for a final thought here in a minute. I want to run through some of these major races that we do have results for tonight. We'll start with the race for Ohio governor. You've heard now from Mike DeWine, who's won re-election. You've heard from former Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley and her concession speech in Dayton. Mike DeWine up with about a 26-point lead on Nan Whaley still right now. It's 63-37. Those are the latest numbers right there on your screen. The U.S. Senate race has flipped. That is JD Vance and Tim Ryan. That has flipped with JD Vance now in the lead and sort of gaining steam in that lead. He's up 53-47. At the moment in the U.S. Senate race. In Kentucky, we told you the U.S. Senate race there was called within a matter of minutes of polls closing across Kentucky. Rand Paul wins re-election over Charles Booker there, and it is 60-40 in that regard. In Indiana, another U.S. Senate race that was called not long after polls closed. This one took a little bit longer, but incumbent Republican Todd Young has won re-election over a Democrat and an independent in that case here. That first congressional district in Ohio, Greg Landsman and Steve Chabot, that is arguably one of the closest races in the country. David Niven, you were just talking about that. Any political watchers and anyone who's maybe been with us here, kind of walking out with us on this, that is going to be a close race. That's going to be so close, we're going to be watching this one until all the votes are in, and there's still a lot of votes to be counted in Hamilton County. And based on the map, a lot of them are coming from traditionally conservative parts of, or more conservative parts of the county. So we'll see how that is, because right now Greg Landsman up 53%, 47%. We're talking about 13,000 votes separating the two there. Ohio had two constitutional amendments on, both of them huge leads. Amendment 1 deals with bond. Amendment 2 deals with non-citizens voting. Brad Wenstrup in the second congressional district in Ohio has won that race. He's won re-election, the Republican incumbent there over Samantha Meadows. You see there 73%, 27%, just a massive victory for Brad Wenstrup. The 8th district hasn't been called or projected quite yet, but Warren Davidson, the Republican incumbent there, has started to pull quite a bit ahead here. It's 65% to 35%. We're talking about 45,000 votes separate the two there. It's only a matter of time before that is likely called. Thomas Massey in Kentucky's 4th congressional district. That race was called fairly quickly as well. He beat Matt Lehman, the Democrat there, also beat an independent candidate, Ethan Osborne, 64%, 33%. Again, we're talking about 60,000 votes difference with Massey's lead there. Indiana's 6th congressional district, we just told you about that. It was just called for Greg Pence. It's Mike Pence's brother. He's the Republican incumbent there, 68% to 32% over Cynthia Worth. Indiana, the 9th congressional district, is also one we're watching. The Republican incumbent there is also going to win pretty significantly, but it has not been called yet. Kentucky had 2 constitutional amendments. One of them deals with letting lawmakers call a special session, basically call themselves back in. It's actually a very close race here with about 30,000 votes separating that. It takes that power away from exclusively from the governor and gives it to state lawmakers. The big one in Kentucky, though, is that Amendment 2, the abortion rights amendment, and whether that would be enshrined in the Constitution that you cannot get an abortion in the state of Kentucky. That race has gotten significantly closer recently, but it is still up 54 to 46% here. Of course, we are looking at about 300 some odd local races. So many of you have city council races, county commissioner races. The Cincinnati Public Schools has a levy. Hamilton County has several levies as well. We're keeping track of all those up on WCPO.com as well. Butler County Commission, you've got a race there. Warren County Commission, that's actually been called for Tom Grossman. Warren County has one, but take a look here. That's the website, WCPO.com, with all those results. So we're going to start to wrap up here wherever you're streaming us. We appreciate you being with us, streaming with us here. Something we thought we'd try, a little bit more informal maybe, but we still had all the resources of our reporting team, and we had the expertise of our guy we call for politics, David Niven. So as we wrap up here in the last couple of minutes, final thoughts on where things stand, at least at this hour, and where things might stand by about the, at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Sure. Well, a couple thoughts. Certainly one, most of what we're talking about is, parties holding serve, winning places we would expect them to win, doing what we would expect. Second thing I think that's really cemented out of this race is Ohio is a Republican state. I mean, that's just the bottom line in 2022. It has a history of being one of the most competitive states, a history of being the bellwether.
We like to tell people we're a bellwether.
Right. It's the most interesting state in the country. And the bottom line now is Republicans start with an advantage, and you should expect them to win, barring extraordinary Democratic campaign success or an extraordinary, public, mood or wave. And that's what we're seeing. And what's interesting, Ohio is more like Indiana and Kentucky than it's ever been before in terms of voting. And we're coming out of that, seeing that tonight. Third thing, though, is, that first congressional district is something of the little engine that could race in terms of, despite all of the gerrymandering that absolutely characterizes the Ohio redistricting process, they created accidentally a competitive district. They created one where a very serious campaign, well funded on both sides, took place, and we could see one of the very few bright spots for Democrats in Ohio or across the nation in that first district.
And we've got the numbers up for you there. Landsman's still up 53% of the vote right now over the incumbent Republican Steve Chabot, a guy who anyone who lives on the west side certainly has like a Chabot for Congress cup that they got at a church festival. Something you may not know about Steve Chabot, on Election Day, he likes to stand on an overpass and wave and say thank you to people as they pass by. This Steve Chabot is what I would always consider an old school Republican. Anytime I've ever interviewed him in a campaign office, he knows the name and where someone lives of everyone who has a Steve Chabot sign, and he probably knows their whole family. Greg Landsman may have had a big kind of a lot of name recognition, leverage, and a political capital to overcome there. But right now he's up, and again, in part potentially because of a significantly more competitive district, if not going from somewhat skewed Republican to maybe now skewed for Democrats through this process. Looking at the Tim Ryan, JD Vance race, which at this point is no longer close, you mentioned how Tim Ryan broke through. I'm curious if you think he uses this now as whether it's he wants to run for president, or does Tim Ryan have a future, or what kind of future does he have after what is likely to be a loss here tonight?
Well, this is the difficult question for Democrats in Ohio. there's very, very few who have any kind of statewide name recognition. There's very, very few, who have the stature to sort of start a campaign with any kind of standing. And Tim Ryan now is clearly at the top of that list. The Democrats would nominate him for anything he'd be willing to run for. But, the question, of course, is running as a Democrat in Ohio right now is a little bit like running, headfirst into a brick wall. The rewards are kind of limited. And so does he want a future in politics? Does he want to continue this effort? I think a lot of folks would say this was enough, that he ran a strong campaign, that he outperformed the Democratic ticket. I mean, look how many votes more he has than Nan Whaley. He outperformed, his party, and yet it still wasn't enough. And even the fact that, JD Vance is not that strong a candidate. He didn't start with a lot of name recognition. He didn't run a great campaign, didn't raise a lot of money. He was obviously the beneficiary of a Trump endorsement and the beneficiary of a lot of outside spending.
I was going to ask you, is the Trump effect still clearly in play then here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit Trump. It's tens of millions of outside dollars that were spent for Vance, but really it's a base vote. Put a Republican on the ballot in Ohio, and they, the odds are they're going to win. So it says a lot more about Ohio than it does about what Vance accomplished in the campaign.
All right. So with that, we are going to keep our eyes particularly on that race and on Ohio's 1st congressional district. Something you should know, just some housekeeping things, right? We're going to have scrolling results for you. It's up. It's happening right now on Channel 9 if you're watching us on TV, if you're watching this stream. We appreciate you. Thanks for being part of sort of a fun experiment. Thanks to you for being part of this.
My pleasure.
Just something different we're trying here on election night to give some context and use our resources here. We have full coverage at 11 over on Channel 9, and of course we stream that as well. My last question for David Niven from UC. If you had to write a curriculum based on this 2022 midterm, what are the lessons or what are the things you tell your students to look at as what does the history book say?
I would say a couple things. One, we're in this pattern, and midterms are always difficult for the president's party. They have been, for generations. But we're in this pattern even more so now, where we tend to want to punish the party in power. And we did it during the Trump years. We did it during the Obama years. We did it during the Bush years. We did it, during the Clinton years. It's one of the voters' favorite things to do. So that's one. Two, we're seeing, a hardening of party line votes, where, states move in a direction and they keep moving that way. A generation ago, half the U.S. Senate was elected from states that their party lost in the presidential race. Now we're down to 6 out of 100 senators who were elected against the presidential results. And we're seeing in Ohio's Senate vote right now that holding up. It's very hard to win in a state that your party isn't winning overall.
All right, David Niven from UC. We're going to wrap things up here. Thank you again for being with us. Results are up on WCPO.com. They're in the app that you may be watching us on right now. So we thank you for being here. We thank you for trusting us on this midterm election night, one of a good amount of consequence for a lot of people. And with that, we will wrap things up and see you at 11 over on WCPO 9. Have a good night.